Hey, 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 we are here, excited to be here for Here and Where Are All the Black People. My name is Quentin Williams, Executive Director and founder of We the People Stage. I'm here with two other wonderful members of the Philly Ad Club. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. Melinda, why don't you go first?
Great. Hi, it's good to be here. My name is Melinda Ramos. I am the VP and Director of Talent and Diversity at Brownstein Group. I'm also a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Philly Ad Club, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this conversation.
All right.
And I'm Gary Shepard. I'm founder, president, and CEO of Third Floor Media, a boutique advertising agency with full production capability. I also co-chair, but I think I'm the chair now of the diversity committee of the Philly Ad Club. I sit on the board as a board member as well. I also sit on the board of the African American Chamber of Commerce and served on several other boards in the past as well here in the Philadelphia market.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to chat with us about our topic today, which is diversity, inclusion, and what gives us hope for the future. We are convening here on Zoom. It's Thursday, August 27th. It's a few days after the tragic shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The country has been in a constant state of civil and social unrest since George Floyd's death and killing in May, and we find ourselves in this situation again. So, of course, our conversation was designed before this incident, but the media and what's happening in our world 100% impacts how we show up to the table and what's going through our heads, and the work that we're specifically engaged in with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I just wanted to give a moment for us to acknowledge what's happening in the country. It probably puts an exclamation mark on why we're having this conversation today. So to start us off, our first question is, based on your experiences in the advertising industry, how do you think the social unrest following George Floyd's death has shifted the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion within the advertising industry and the greater communications industry, especially relative to how those conversations were occurring before that incident?
Well, Melinda, you want to go?
Yeah, I would love to, actually. I think the conversation has shifted in a really major way. I think prior to George Floyd's death specifically, because there have been a number of police brutality, murders and, claiming of lives of Black and brown people for years and years and years. And there were some that occurred prior this year even. But I think what has shifted is we were taking a very sort of passive approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we were sort of thinking of it as it's a nice to have. We'll do that kind of work and we'll focus a percentage of our energy to it, but never really diving 100% headfirst into it. And I think to some degree, and I'll speak for myself in this instance, that I particularly with my agency and with my colleagues was taking a very sort of, I'll call it a kid gloves approach to it, because I didn't want to be pushy. I didn't want to be overly aggressive in pushing the agenda forward. And when George Floyd's death occurred and everyone on a national stage watched it happen, I think suddenly people finally were able to open their eyes to the kinds of inequity, but the kind of horrific injustices that Black people live with every single day. And suddenly people who were not involved in the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion were suddenly extremely interested and really wanting to push the agenda forward. And I've always said that this isn't simply an HR issue. It's not simply a diversity and inclusion coach issue. It's not a one person issue. It's not a brown person issue. It's not a Black person issue. It is everyone's issue. And so the fact that so many of our white colleagues and broader networks started to engage in the conversation, we actually were able to make even greater strides only in the last couple of months, which is amazing because many of us have been doing this work for years and years and years and have not seen a significant change in how the needle was moving, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a really positive thing. In the national platform, it hasn't changed a whole lot. And this is my doorbell ringing right now. So you'll have to excuse me for a second. I'll let Gary go.
Thank you for allowing me to do so. So, thank you so much for that, Melinda. I have to say that, first of all, Quentin, I am pleased to hear the title of this conference has reverted back to what it was in the beginning. Where are all the Black people as it relates to advertising and marketing and our industry that we're in right now? Frankly, I've got to tell you, when I heard about it, and I just heard about it a couple of years ago, here are all the Black people, I was a bit offended by that because I had never heard of this conference before. And how can you mandate or make that statement, here are all the Black people? That wasn't true. That was kind of a surface title that was put on it. So where are all the Black people with question mark behind it? That's a good change to that title. And we can start to delve down into that to find out where the Black people are in this industry. Now, what I have seen, to specifically address your question as far as advertising is concerned, you will now see more people of color, more Black people, darker skin hues on TV commercials. I cannot tell you if I ever remember a time where I was looking at television where I saw 3 or 4 commercials on TV that Black people were featured in it. Now, that's a start. That's a beginning. We have a long way to go from there. We have to look at where we are as it relates to the industry itself and those people who are in positions like Melinda's in position that she's in. Those positions that are executive positions, those decision makers, those people who are in the room to make decisions on creative and all of those kinds of things. There was a commercial that ran on TV, and what I do have to say is, with the pandemic, with everybody staying home, people are watching a lot more of television. So that helped to spread the message about the racial inequity, the systemic racism that has taken place over the years and years and years, because people, you're looking at that tube, you're watching it right there in front of it, and you can't help but see it. Mm-hmm. There was a commercial that ran that showed, and well, maybe I shouldn't get into this, but I have to, because it rubbed me the wrong way. There was a commercial that was on that ran, it had a white couple, and then it had a Black woman sitting with a so-called groundhog, okay? And to me, it showed that, that was her date, that's who she was with, instead of being with a Black man right there with her. And the groundhog could have played a role in it. Now that commercial ran, but it was taken off and it was changed because they rotate and they change these commercials from time to time. I think part of that was done because of the sensitivity that has been created around the issue of racial equity and inclusion, all right? And I think that was taken off because of that, I don't know. But for it to run in the first place, it shows me that it appears that there was no person of color in the room to make the decision to give the green light for that commercial to air and to run. So we are making progress. It's there, but we still have a long way to go. We're seeing more of people who look like us on television, but we need more people in the C-suites who look like us to make those decisions, so those kinds of images will not be allowed to air in the first place.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that Melinda and I were actually having a conversation about that very topic of crisis in the advertising industry, and how there's always crisis, and you can speak to this more eloquently than I can, Melinda. There doesn't necessarily need to be that as much of that kind of crisis.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think if you are clear that Black and brown people should be telling their own stories, then you limit the type of crisis where you're pulling a commercial because you told a Black or brown story from a white person's perspective,
Right.
you know? And that's the thing that that advertising and media has gotten wrong for so long. And I think that what's happening now is we're seeing a real shift in the thinking. And it's one thing to have a shift in the makeup of your people, but you have to really have a shift in the thinking and the behavioral changes in order to be able to see those changes through. Because simply putting a Black face on TV doesn't solve the bigger problem that you don't understand the Black experience. You don't understand the brown experience. You don't understand the nuances of growing up and being who you are, being who they are, if you're not in that community. And so the people of that community should be the ones telling those stories firsthand. And there isn't enough representation in advertising to be able to tell those stories most effectively. And I think that is ultimately what Gary is observing, is that you've got a commercial running and you stick a Black face in there and you just offended, 13% of the population, or, whatever the.
Yeah. As the owner of an agency, I mean, it's been kind of difficult for us in terms of making inroads into major accounts because you have that so-called old boy network that has been in place for so many years. And there has not been sharing of information, of technologies, and those kinds of things. I'm seeing that beginning to crack open now, just a little bit. It's beginning to crack open now, where that sharing of that technology and the information and ways of doing things and best practices are beginning to be shared now, because as you look at the makeup of the country, we're all in this together. When coronavirus hit, it's hitting everybody. Granted, it's hitting the African-American population more severely than it has the other populations, but everybody is getting it, and it's not discriminating. So we're all in this whole thing together. So when we share information, we share best practices, we share technologies, we share economics, okay? Because that is one of the keys we have to look at, the economy and the economics. If a person has a job, do you think that they're gonna be involved in any other kind of shady activity to get money? If they know they have to be to work the next day and they're making a decent pay to take care of their family, to send their kids to college, to buy their homes, to have food and the shelter and all of that, do you think that they're going to be involved in shady activity? I don't think so, because as we look at it, we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what all of us are looking for. Basically, every human being on the face of the earth wants that. And unfortunately, in some countries, they don't have the freedom that the freedoms that we have here to be able to pursue that. But basically, as human beings, we're all looking for the same thing out of life. And if we have good jobs, we have the economy that's being distributed equitably across, especially within the African-American community that we have been locked out of for so long, okay, that will go a long way to help to mitigate some of the issues that we've been dealing with.
Absolutely. And I love that you just brought in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One of the main reasons why I named my organization We the People Stage is because it is, a play off of the Constitution. What is this country? What is this world that we truly want to live in. And I believe, being a media guy, someone who spent more than 15 years in radio and digital media, that as you have both said, the lack of inclusion and the narrative building of many of these diverse stories has led to one-dimensional or very shallow depictions of who people of color are. It almost, people, I would imagine people feel justified in their creating up a commercial that has a Black woman with a groundhog in it. And I am reassured, I'm hopeful with the direction that we're going in, because I do see greater representation in the media with Black creators, with people of color being in director roles, producer roles, being part of the writing room. So I feel hopeful, but it's not enough. And right. To one of the points that you brought up earlier, this is an interesting time that we find ourselves in, because all at once it seems the attention of so many businesses, of so many titles and levels throughout these different organizations have shifted towards an awareness that there does need to be some greater level of inclusion and diversity at the table. I think that in many instances, it's a little bit of a clumsy pursuit. We don't always know how to go about making that happen. So my question is, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion work look like for you within your respective fields and businesses? Gary, you're the owner, so also I would ask you to share what's been your experience, trying to get that seat at the table, and other organizations that you might work within or volunteer for.
Well, I have to say that when I talked about sharing of technologies and information and best practices and those kinds of things, there have been, and just more recently, people of color have been exposed to the fact that there are other jobs within the industry besides being on camera or on a microphone. All right. They may not even be aware of that. A person may have an aptitude to be a creative director or to write copy or, to go into sales. All right. Be an account manager. Now those kinds of things. And there's still others, that I myself may not still be aware of. But if that's shared and people know about it, then people of color have an opportunity to apply for those positions. And as you well know, over the years and the history of the country, Black people have been very, very creative. You will hear about music. My background is music. I'm a musician. I was on radio for many, many years. And just looking at music that was created years ago was called, in the beginning, was called race music. And some of that race music was copied by white artists who took the very same songs that were recorded by Black artists, and they became huge hits for the white artists. All right, and that's the history of it. So we've been very creative over the years. And once these positions are at least known to our younger students who are not only in college, but I'll say high school, middle school, elementary school, and let's go back to pre-K. Once these positions are known where a person can make a good living from doing that, then who knows, we might have the next Black person, be it man or woman, boy or girl, design something that's can cure cancer. All right, now that's taking it obviously to the extreme, but still, when I talk about the sharing of information, best practices, technologies, and all of that, that will allow our people to become more involved in that, to contribute to the society. And unfortunately now, in order to get the attention, some of our folks think that there has to be rioting. There has to be the burning of neighborhoods and buildings and things like that. All right. And it has gotten the attention of the larger population now. Melinda was talking earlier about some of her white friends saying they're tired of having the conversation about race. Well, imagine having to live that your entire life. I remember just back being in a kindergarten years ago when I discovered that, okay, it's something must be different about me, because coming from a family, a loving family, and being treated a little differently in the school that I went to. And I went to so-called integrated schools my entire life. But when you're looked at differently and you talked to differently and you're treated a little differently, you begin to develop what I call the radar. When you go into a situation as a human being and you're dealing with somebody as a human being, and then all of a sudden they either say something or act a certain way or treat you a certain way, that your radar goes up and say, uh-oh, I'm dealing with something a little different here.
And they other you.
Say
They
that.
other you.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if that made any sense, but, you know, just imagine living that entire life. And I worked with someone many years ago. He said, and he was a white friend of mine. He said, I can't imagine being a Black man and having to live that every day of my life. Can you imagine the stress that puts on you?
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that your comments bring to mind is having to turn on the TV and see this otherness, you know, to see the depictions of how others perceive us as being different and less than, or just not on the same level. So that I think relates. And Melinda, you had said earlier that before George Floyd, you felt as though you had to approach diversity, inclusion, equity within some of the organizations that you've worked for with kid gloves. So how has that changed? What are some of the tangible ways that your role has evolved?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting shift in my mind when that occurred, because I had been very careful not to be perceived as pushing my own personal agenda, even though it is very personal to me. But when that murder occurred, suddenly there was a shift in my mind where I said, you know what, I'm taking the gloves off, actually. Right. And I'm going to be more of a blunt force, object in this particular movement, because not only is it important to me as a person of color, it's important to me as a citizen of this country, as a resident of Philadelphia. It is important to me to see a world where people are being regarded and judged on their individual merits and not based on their race. And it was important to me to force the conversation and make it really, really uncomfortable for people. And I started that conversation with, I hosted an all hands conversation with my agency a couple of weeks after George Floyd's death. And I basically showed a video of an activist who you probably know, Kimberly Jones, who I think is phenomenal. She's incredibly vocal. And she really broke it down in a way that I think made people who had never really understood what 400 years of oppression really means. And she broke it down in a way that was not at all polite, not at all, dressed up in a pretty bow and, softened. And it was very hard hitting. And it was in a way disturbing. And that is exactly what I wanted people to feel by showing that video. And then having a conversation, a discussion around why we live in a world where this is acceptable where this is acceptable for anyone. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've hosted a series of those kinds of dialogues where we're talking about, the prison complex system. We're talking about the war on drugs. We're talking about, the inequities that have taken place over centuries, and how they affect who we hire, why we hire, and why our industry lacks so much diversity today. And all of those things that have occurred over the years ultimately result in, we don't hire Black and brown people. You know, we don't think they're qualified. When the conversation happens around, we've got an open position, we have, you know, a position of management, and I say, we need to focus on diversity. We need to diversify our teams. Here's all the reasons why. Here's the case study why. Here's the statistics about why we need to do it. And the question is asked of me, well, we are going to hire somebody really qualified, right? We're looking for the most exceptional person, right? And I think it sets the conversation back. You know, I think it derails us. I think it's incredibly loaded, that kind of comment. It's based in no real data points except for what you've learned over the years based on falsehoods. And I think personally, it's incredibly insulting, because I'm a person of color and I am the most qualified person to do my job. And I do it exceptionally well. And I know that about myself. Mm-hmm. And yet the question being brought to the table is, well, is somehow a diversified, you know, candidate pool and the most qualified candidate pool are somehow two different pools of people. Right. Yeah. And that is just completely wrong. And when I have conversations with my other, you know, colleagues in the industry, or business owners in the industry who are largely white, and they say, well, it's so hard to find Black and brown candidates. You know, it's so much work. The work happens naturally when you allow yourself to move past the discomfort of talking about race. Mm-hmm. The work happens naturally when you decide that you want to give someone an opportunity to just get to know them a little bit. You know, that is how we expand our networks, and that is how our friendships evolve over time. We allow someone to get to know us, and for them to, you know, be allowed to get to be gotten to know. And if you're not willing to do that kind of work, which is really simple, it's actually probably one of the easiest things you can do, you naturally are going to think it's hard to find good candidates. Naturally, it's going to be a difficult thing for you to find smart, qualified, motivated, hardworking individuals, because you're not willing to do the work to get to know people who don't look like you. And that's a problem, clearly.
Yeah.
So Melinda, you know, I'm glad you said that about taking the gloves off, because as soon as you had said that about, you know, dealing it with kid gloves, and I was thinking the same thing. Now is the time for the gloves to come off. There was a time whenever we talked about race issues or racial issues, we always speak in hushed tones, like we get in trouble, like somebody is looking over our shoulder and we couldn't.
It's a dirty secret.
Now is the time for those discussions to take place. And obviously, when you're looking for candidates, if you're a quality company that's going to provide good quality service, like I talk to my team about all the time, you're going to look for the best candidate, you know, be it whatever the color of that person's skin is. For us, we're going to look for people who look like us, obviously, because we've been locked out for so long. We're going to look, but if there's someone who can provide us with the service, and we deal with everyone, we deal with everybody, you know, in our personal lives, in my personal life, as well as in our business. If somebody is going to provide us the good quality service, naturally, we're going to look for people who look like us first. Okay. Right. And I'm not apologetic about that. I'm not apologetic about being a Black man. When I look at myself, I don't use the term minority to describe myself, because when I do that, I'm describing myself through someone else's lens. I'm a citizen of the US. You said that earlier. I'm a citizen of this country. I'm a citizen of this world. I'm a Black man of African descent, a man of color. My wife and I had an opportunity to visit Ghana last year. It was only my third time visiting the continent. I've been to North Africa, I've been to East Africa, I went to West Africa last year. And we had an opportunity to visit two slave dungeons in Ghana, the Cape Coast Slave Dungeon and Elmina Slave Dungeon. And that was so riveting and emotional and intense and educational and heart-rendering. I mean, all of those emotions came into play at once. It's almost overwhelming to learn the story of how the slave trade began, where it began, and the treatment that our ancestors received during that period of time, and how it has manifested now in some of the behavior, not with just white people, but Black people as well. Yeah. So we have to look at the history. I'm a big advocate of studying the history, because if you don't know your history, it's going to be repeated and you don't know your value. Okay. So when we visited there and we came back home, it was a continued reawakening of who we are, who we have been, and the contributions we have made, not just to the country, but to the world, and continue to make to this day. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's, you got to know where you come from in order to know where you're going. And in this work, it is a lot of uncovering the work that's already been done by so many who have come before us. It's understanding the systems and structures that perpetuate racism. It's really dialing in on the language that's being used in these organizations and our various circles and behind closed doors that basically personify and manifest those racial biases that you had touched on, Melinda. So in our conversation, we've already hit on a number of really, really important and critical points. That sharing best practices around the work of diversity, inclusion, and equity is critical to there being a shift throughout the entire industry. And within organizations, this is work that isn't on the it doesn't rest on the shoulder of just one person. This is work that has to permeate the entire organization. And as Melinda had said to me prior to our conversation, it's highly important that leadership truly buys in. And even if there is a lack of understanding from leadership initially, there has to be a genuine desire to learn.
Right.
These conversations we've heard can be exhausting. You know, they're exhausting to white people, they're exhausting to Black people, to brown people, to people who consider themselves to be somewhere on the spectrum. But it's important we support one another.
Yeah, we have to have these conversations. I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. We cannot forget that. Things that are happening right now in terms of the progress we've made as African Americans, we're standing on the shoulders to all of those who came before us, the John Lewises, the Martin Luther Kings, and even going way, way back into history when we talk about people like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. So we're standing on those shoulders. Can you imagine having to get up, work from sun up to sundown and can't see anymore in the hot sun, and creating an economy to help put this nation on the map? And all of those people, and when I hear people now talk about, I'm not going to vote, what difference does it make? You just think about those people who gave their lives and who went through the struggle to make sure that we have the right to vote. The women's suffrage movement, I just heard one of the leaders talk about how now it's incredible to her 100 years later, where after women got the right to vote, how 1 out of 3 women still do not exercise that right to vote. Well, just take that and look at it within the African American community when there's so much distrust about the political system and government and the police and all of that, and they do not exercise their right to vote. This is an important time for us to understand that we've got to get out and vote. That's one of the ways your voice can be heard. That's one of the ways I say it.
Yes.
I mentioned earlier about, the rioting and all of that. Obviously, that has attracted attention, and people are either standing up and paying attention to it and trying to do something about it, or trying to downplay it and make it, the boogeyman is coming after you.
Well, here's one takeaway that from your comments just now is we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and those weren't easy times. And we see a lot of spoofs, especially from some of the late night talk show hosts, of asking people when was America great? When was it great? I think it's important for us to acknowledge that this work can be draining. But I also think it's important for us to, as you had said, Gary, lift up the work of those who have come before us, lift up the work of those of us who are currently engaged in it right now, and to accept that this is not easy work. This is not an easy conversation to engage with. And these systems are well entrenched. There's momentum, there's inertia. These are institutions that we're attempting to change, not just thoughts and ideas. So as we engage in this work, to accept and know that it's going to be challenging, but maybe no more or less challenging than the times that have come before us. Maybe we can find some energy in that and continue forward.
Understand.
So in closing, what are your closing thoughts? As we said at the very beginning of this conversation, the social unrest is only continuing as we get closer to Election Day, with the unfortunate shooting, not unfortunate, the racist shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and the continued social unrest. So what are some thoughts that you would like to leave all of us with?
Quentin, if you don't mind, I don't know if we can mandate change, because it has to be in people's hearts. I wish no ill will for anyone. I just want everybody to understand that what we're seeing now is coming to light, and we're able to see it because of the pandemic, because, as I said, people are isolated a lot more now, and we're able to, we see it on television, we have it on our phones, we have it on our computers, so we can see that. I wrote a recent article in the Philly Ad News, and I think it came out this week. It's called Love and Media. Because when I was thinking about what I was going to write for this particular publication, the word love kept coming into my mind, into my consciousness. I kept seeing it, I kept hearing it, and we continue to hear love. Love is a noun and it's a verb as well, okay? And as I thought about it, I thought about the song Love is the Message that was produced back in the 70s by the MFSB Orchestra. These are a group of musicians that was behind what's known as the Philly Sound, with Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff. And they played all of those arrangements for people like the OJs, Teddy Pendergrass, Patti LaBelle, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Lou Rawls, on and on and on, some of the biggest stars in R&B music. So I called Kenny, and Kenny said to me, love, that's what it's all about. It's all about love. So exercise love as an action, and part of the definition is benevolence, and, being kind, giving gifts, sharing and caring. So that's what it's all about. It's all about love.
I would piggyback onto that and say, take it a little bit beyond that and go, it's about love. It's about empathy. Quentin and I, we've talked about having grace in this period of time and allowing for grace in this period of time. And I think it's also about compassion. If you lack those three things, emotions, abilities, whatever you want to call them, I think you shut yourself off to the possibility of what, something new and different can bring. And, different doesn't have to be negative. It shouldn't be, I often use the word unique instead of different, because it has a positive spin, in my opinion. You know, allow for a little bit of empathy toward those you do not know. Allow for a little bit of grace to understand and learn what you don't understand, and a little bit of compassion for you know, everyone around, and vote, you know, and be a part of the change, because it doesn't work if only a small group of people are doing it. Everyone has to want it and be a part of it just as much as those who are most impacted by it, you know, and I think that that's really important.
Mm-hmm. You're on mute.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your thoughts and your energy and all the work that you do in the community at your various organizations. I also want to thank Where Are All the Black People for this opportunity to provide content for this amazing series. The One Club, and of course, Philly Ad Club for giving us this opportunity and this platform. So wish you all the best. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quentin.
Peace.